Hello and welcome. My name is Josh Singh. I'm your host of the Racial Healing Podcast. Welcome. I'm really glad you're here. I started this podcast because I had to do something. I struggled for a long time to figure out what to do about racism. I've always been an ally. I've done my own work around overcoming my own pain and trauma around racism. And I've always known that that is not really enough. So I started this podcast for people to share their stories, to be heard, and for you, the listener, to witness those stories. And my hope is that we can all heal our hearts and our souls from listening and being part of this podcast together. So thank you for being here. Please consider subscribing, and I hope you enjoyed today's interview. Well, welcome to the Racial Healing Podcast. I'm here today with Diane Tran Weinberg. So nice to have you here in the midst of moving where you live, taking some time out to talk.
Sure, not to mention the global pandemic.
Right. Yes, there's that too. So it's kind of safer to be here online where we can't actually take in any air or microparticles that we're carrying around. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, it's great to have you. How's your day going?
It's going really well. We took a slight break from packing. I had brunch with one of our neighbors, which was lovely on her patio just across the walkway out back. But
Nice.
that was really nice. It was great to get to connect a little bit. And she is Indian, and so we had a little conversation that naturally comes up just about our experiences being Asian and people of color, and so that was a really nice warm up for chatting with you.
What can you share something that came up in your conversation with your neighbor?
Yeah, kind of really just talking about being first generation born in America and having immigrant parents with the immigration story, and really I think like a heavy theme was assimilation and kind of this like, I don't know, I would think it's like a learned shame, whether it's learning from our parents, seeing them trying to assimilate into American culture, or whether it's just that like natural kid shame that we learn from being in school and wanting to fit in, and kind of taking until adulthood to almost transform that, not even transform, but to kind of leave that shame behind and feel that pride in having like a larger cultural connection with our backgrounds.
Wow, yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that right off the bat. I definitely want to get into some of that, the shame and the assimilation that you mentioned. Maybe to start off, you could share a little bit about your identity. How do you think of yourself? And you can talk about that in whatever dimension is important to you.
Sure. Thank you. Thanks for the invitation. I identify as a Vietnamese American woman. Woman is funny that I said that. I often think of that Britney Spears song, like not a girl, not quite a woman, not yet a woman. I always feel in that in between, but maybe that'll change one day when I decide to grow up. But definitely proud of my Vietnamese heritage, and relate to being a Vietnamese American. And I know Vietnam's not my home. There's a lot that's familiar, especially when Jesse and I visited. I thought it would feel like a kind of homecoming, and so much of it is foreign, so much is familiar, but really in that like in between worlds, like not just fully American and not just fully Vietnamese. So nice little hybrid.
Yeah. And in terms of other aspects of your identity, when I think of you, I think of California also.
Yeah, sure.
Because go ahead.
Pretty Californian kind of gal. But yeah, I grew up in Southern California. I was really lucky in Irvine. That was another thing I was talking to my neighbor about just a little while ago. She grew up in like Ohio and Dallas, Texas, and there weren't a lot of, families and kids who looked like her and who she could identify with on that level. And for me, I was so lucky being in Irvine. Like, Asians are a minority, but just barely. So there are a lot of Asians, like Vietnamese, Japanese, Korean, Filipino, like everything. So I never felt too oddly out. There was always someone around who kind of looked like me and who came from similar backgrounds. But definitely in California, I was a swimmer, then played water polo, I surfed and skateboarded. I move a little bit too slow for anywhere else other than the West Coast. A little too laid back sometimes, I think. But also it's nice because there's a huge population of Vietnamese people. And there's like little Saigon right there. That's just the hub for super authentic Vietnamese food, grocery stores, everything.
So how does the Vietnamese area in Chicago compare to what you grew up with?
Hard to compare it to. In moving, we moved as close as we could to it. We're basically right on Argyle, and good enough for me to like get my thrills and practice my Vietnamese and have all of those like familiar comforts and access to the grocery store and food and, a small sense of community. So I don't think it's lacking. I just think that just size-wise, there's, kind of like San Jose in California and then like Santa Ana or Garden Grove in Southern California. It was just where all the Vietnamese people moved.
Yeah, gotcha.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your family and anything that comes to mind around race and identity? And
Sure.
I know there's a story, the immigration story would be good to tell here.
Yeah. Well, I was born here in the States. My parents, so my mom, dad, and I have two older sisters who are 14 and 15 years older than I am. So I like to say I was the best mistake my parents ever made. But they were all born in Vietnam and lived there actually until after the fall of Saigon, and didn't leave and escape until October of 78. My dad was and is an architect. My mom came from a fairly wealthy family. My grandpa on my mom's side was fairly wealthy, had a lot of resources and connections. And my sisters were born at the time. They were, in 78, they would have been like 4 and 5 years old, just about. My dad had organized a lot of different plans to escape and, got a boat that he was trying to convert into, to have like seafaring capabilities. He organized the route that they would escape, the different families who would escape with them, provisions, food, water, everything for a safe journey, and tried a couple times and it didn't quite pan out. And it wasn't until after the fall of Saigon in October of 78 where he found I think it was a riverboat that he transformed, kind of took out a lot of parts just to make as much room as possible, gathered what he planned to be just about 40 people total inside this little boat, but ended up being about 80.
Wow.
Different members of like families, friends, other people who had heard that they were trying to leave. And my dad, my mom, my two sisters, my uncle, one of my cousins on my dad's side, plus a lot of other people trying to leave, got on this boat and made this journey into the ocean during the stormy monsoon season, because that was when there would be less patrol on the open waters. And they had heard about this big storm coming, and someone had warned them about this whirlpool in the middle of the ocean that they like steered around, because a lot of other boats and a lot of other families trying to escape had came to a worse fate with that. But they made it safely to Malaysia, or an island just off of Malaysia called Pulau Bedong, and spent about 6 months on that island. That was a huge refugee camp for a lot of Vietnamese people during and after the war. I think it was operating until like even just a decade ago as a refugee island, or 2 decades ago. And my family always tells this story of how it was just all coral reef around there. And my dad would kind of trudge through the reef to carry in my sisters and my mom and help other families in. And in their 6 months spent on the island, it was a very meager existence. They had just little tents, but in the time that they were there, they built a jetty to help other people who were escaping Vietnam kind of get in a little bit easier and safer. They built a hospital there. They really, there are a few pictures that they have from that time, and every single photo just looks like almost like a family on a camping trip. They're around a little fire. My sisters are little, and everyone's smiling and having a great time. And I think that's a big part of my parents, and I know a lot of other escapees from Vietnam, is this kind of attitude of, like, we left our home country for a better life, and we all made it safely. What's there to complain about? What was so harrowing of a journey? Like, what hardships did I face? We made it alive when a lot of people didn't. After being on the refugee island for about 6 months, my parents had family already in the States, and so they had sent word. They were sponsored through Catholic Charities to come to the States, and they flew from Malaysia to LA, and we're actually headed to Reno, Nevada, before my mom contacted her uncle, who was already in Southern California, and he helped kind of rework the network to get them a new sponsor in Southern California, a little closer to family. So instead of, they went to Reno for just a short stint and then headed back to LA and then down to Downey, where it was kind of the first place that they settled.
Wow. Diane, that is quite a story. Really powerful and moving to hear about all that. There's one word that you used a number of times that really stood out so much, and that's escape, which I associate with so much danger. And somehow the word escape and immigration do not go together in my mind, although so often I think it is.
Yeah, that's interesting you say that, because it's very much so almost the same thing to me. Because
it's the same thing
to me, and that's the familial, or just the realm that it exists in my family is just escape. Yeah. And especially, I think, in like recent history too, with like Syrian. I guess I just so often combine, like, when I hear immigration, I just think refugee, and it's really interesting to hear you share your experience.
Well, I think a lot of it's determined through my father's story, who was an immigrant from India. Who his story is, he was 22 years old and finished college and wanted to go see the world, so he just kind of left home and started exploring. So I think there's more to his story that he hasn't shared, or he shared different versions of it with me, but I think my sense of immigration is formed through his story so much. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So then you were born some years after your parents and sisters settled in California.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then
quite
a few years. Got it. Okay, yeah, you said your sisters are 14 and 15 or 16 years older.
Yes.
Yeah. So your lives just have been, I imagine, so different. Yeah. Can you share a little bit about, like, how do you talk with your sisters about sort of their experience and your experience and compare notes on like growing up here, growing up in Vietnam?
You know, not as much as I'd like. I think it's come up naturally a few times when I was a bit younger. I think as adults, we haven't really had to sit down and talked about it all. It's there's this. My parents did a great job. My family did a great job. I feel like I always grew up feeling loved and taken care of, and I think with like Vietnamese culture and the culture of I don't like respect and almost that like being humble is a virtue. They instilled such great things in me. Also, we weren't a family who like talked a lot. There wasn't. I didn't ever feel like I was lacking feelings or like a good knowledge and understanding of feelings. But really, when I look back on it, there just wasn't. It wasn't there. I felt the love, but there was no. I think I struggle with it to this day. Like if you ask me about how was your day or how are you feeling today, I just state off facts of what happened today, or like things that I'm going through, and there wasn't a big breadth of talking and understanding of feelings. So I think that's something I definitely need to work on with my sisters. I do know that my oldest sister was and still is kind of like a second mom to me. She was always very nurturing, and she said a few times that she saw me as her own baby, and definitely felt that. My middle sister was and is the adventurer in our family. She worked in Antarctica. She traveled all the time. She like had gone off to school in Berkeley, and has now been to all the continents. And she left home when I was still fairly young and would come and visit. And I think, I don't know if it's a middle child thing, and like, hope she doesn't see this, or if she does, she doesn't mind me sharing or hear this. But
you're not the first person who said that on this podcast.
Okay, good. I think there's a little bit more resentment from her, whether known or unknown, acknowledged or unacknowledged. She likes to say it was the perfect time to have a baby in the family because my parents like didn't have to pay attention to her, and she could do whatever she wanted. At the same time, she was constantly the one who, when I was a bratty little kid and wanted the shiny toy that everyone else at school had, she reminded me that when they moved here, they had nothing. That they played with like sticks and mud outside and made the best of it, or maybe had like one balloon to share, and or my oldest sister Nicole like saved one gumdrop that she got from school to like bring home, and here I was just saying like, I want this and I want that. I don't think in like a super spoiled way, thankfully, at least if we play the comparison game compared to a lot of other kids I went to school with and grew up around, I know that my parents were definitely more like disciplined on not giving in to every single ask that I had. And I had a good understanding of just the value of things, but definitely not to the extent that my sisters did. I grew up in Irvine. It's a super safe city. I had like a park across the street, and just across the street from the park was a pool, and then just across the street from the pool was like this man-made lake with a lagoon and slides and like another pool there. And I was never ever left wanting. And my middle sister Teresa definitely was not shy in taking the opportunity to remind me that that is not how they had it.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy, as an outsider to be so feel sympathetic towards both of you. You were living your life. You didn't have those experiences that your sisters had, and how could you? There's no possible way to develop that sort of understanding of the world that your sisters had, and obviously, sympathetic towards your sisters who went through so much. And here you come, who has, just a more comfortable life. it's a lot to hold. It's really a lot to hold.
Definitely.
Yeah.
I think, one, just that, and also something else that we have talked about now that both of my sisters have kids, is that
Mm-hmm.
I got a really different side of my parents. Like, even though we
Right.
have the same parents, I
Yeah.
had very different parents. My parents were very different people than who my sisters had raising them, because once I was born, my parents were settled. They both had long-standing jobs, had kind of already built this life up, versus my sisters were kind of with people who were trying to survive, and who like didn't have a lot of time to check in. It was just always doing the next thing and trying to, I think, in the realm of security, I think both like I had a much more secure relationship with my parents, and I had a lot more like physical security and home and things and schooling, and just that I had never had the experience, of leaving the place I lived in a really dangerous and abrupt way. And I think no matter how young they were, that definitely leaves an impression.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Diane, I'm so thankful for you sharing your story. I think it's so good, for people to hear your experience and just have their hearts and opened up by what you're sharing. So I'm really grateful that you're sharing all that you are. Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity.
Sure. Yeah. So I wanted to ask you about a couple other things. So you talked about growing up in Irvine, and Asian people were the minority, but not by much. And now you've been living in Chicago for, I don't know, less than a year. A year?
It's
It's been
today?
about a year. Wow, that went by quick.
Yeah.
So do you find that your preference or your kind of comfort zone is to be around people who are somehow, like you, around race or ethnicity?
Yes. I think it's a little complicated. I think that there's I have found comfort. I think after leaving Irvine, after just leaving high school and having life experience as an adult in other places, I moved to LA. And so very diverse in a lot of different ways. People come from everywhere to be in LA.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there was, I don't know when the point was, but I started to have this awareness of just being in very like white spaces.
Mm.
Kind of this, I remember being young and kind of rejecting my like Asianness.
Mm.
Like there was in middle school, there was this big group of Asians they called themselves the Asian Pride. And even though I had a lot of AP, I had a lot of friends and knew a lot of people who were in this group, there was like nothing about me that wanted to be a part of it. And actually a lot of me that like actively rejected being part of that group. There was so much of me that actively rejected anything that seems stereotypically Asian, which I think is this like deep-seated need to assimilate. Or I remember, wanting to. I remember when people like or boys first started getting interested in me and thought that I was attractive, and I thought like, well, I wish I just like looked like everyone else. I wish I was just kind of like white and didn't look Asian, so that I would know if it was like by my own merits, like anything that I did. It's like, is it by my own merits, or is it because I stand out a little, because I look different? I like can't look like everyone else. Although, again, like by barely a minority, Asians were everywhere. But I think that started to change once I I don't know what happened, maybe being away from home, just having other experiences in the world, I started to definitely appreciate being Vietnamese more. And I think that's when there's just something comforting. I don't know if it's a preference in being in those areas. I think yes, because I celebrate diversity now as an adult, now that I have this pride in being Vietnamese and having this cultural connection. There's definitely a comfort in being in a space where everyone else looks predominantly like me, where I don't necessarily stand out. When I like walk in the door, I'm not getting looks and having to wonder, like, is it just because I walked in the door and they would look at anyone like that? Or is it because I look different than most of the people in this place? And not saying it's malicious, not saying it's in any way like overtly racist. It's just, you can't escape the looks and just people noticing that I look different.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's the shame that you mentioned, kind of previewed in the very beginning, of like wanting to fit in and, you know, kind of not feeling great about, you know, that those questions of whether it is something about your appearance and how people are reacting to it. Have you experienced, gone through experiences that you either knew at the time or later on upon reflection thought, that was racist, like that was just, that was racism?
Yes. What feels like to me more of microaggression kind of realm. I don't think there's anything that's been overtly racist, like things that I've seen, especially since COVID-19 has come along. I spent a summer in Portland, Oregon with my middle sister, and I worked at the restaurant that she was working in, and there was this like older white man who was sitting at a table, and I came by and I was saying hello to people, and he was like, "Oh my gosh, you're just like, you're so great. Your English is so great." And I was like, "Thank you." I was like, "Yeah, well, I appreciate that. That means that, you know, public schools did me well." And he was like, "Where," you know, the classic, like, where are you from? And I was like, Southern California, you know, like, let's see how far we can get down this road before you really ask me what it is you want to ask. So I said Southern California. And
so thank you for sharing those stories. And do you get asked, where are you from? Is that a regular thing for you, or is that?
That was one of so many, which is where I think I learned to play the game, to make it a little interesting and fun for myself, so I get something out of it. But it's that, and just, you know, like little jokes that for a long time felt okay, you know, just those like stereotypical jokes of, you know, being good at math or being a bad driver, whatever it is. I really don't recall ever experiencing like very overt and aggressive racism. And I think I'm learning a lot too. I think I think in order to like make myself more comfortable or kind of play this role to like ease group tensions, like I used to be the one to always make the joke, you know, when I thought like, I know everyone else is thinking it, like I might as well be the person to say it, to like break the ice so everyone else feels comfortable, or you know, or because, you know, when at the end of dinner, back when we all used to go out to dinner together in groups of people, and it was time to do the bill, you know, if it ever came to me, I would be the one to make the joke of like, "Oh, why do you want me to do it? Because I'm Asian." And I'm really just now starting to learn that like I'm part of the problem, you know, like that's not a role I need to play. That's not my job. And making those jokes is detrimental to me and detrimental to Asians and all people of color. I'm not really doing any good work or, setting a good example by making, what's deep-seated racism and stereotypes normalized and funny.
Mm-hmm.
That's something I've definitely been working on recently because I'm not someone who likes tension. I am the person who cracks a joke just to make everything feel a little bit easier and a little bit more comfortable. So it's taking a lot of restraint and just consciousness around it.
Good for you for stepping into that discomfort and uncertainty. Yeah. So you mentioned being in white spaces, and sort of being aware that you're in a white space. Does that happen like anytime you're with white people? Like even in like a one-on-one interaction, are you aware of race and whiteness and difference? Yes.
Especially now. I think especially since this most current like protest and movement around Black lives and people of color and police brutality, I think that I'm definitely more aware of it. I always have been, I think, just as I don't know, almost like an intuitive feeling. It's not anything I do on purpose, but as soon as I walk into a room, it's kind of like casing the joint for an escape. It's more looking around thinking like, okay, how many people of color are in here? Am I the only one? Great. Or like, oh, thank God there's one other person there in the corner, and kind of slight nod to whoever that is. But something that I've definitely come to realize is that they're all white spaces, like for the most part, not every, but most spaces are white spaces. And it exists really on a spectrum. We had visited Jesse's brother in Montana, and we're on our way to some hot springs, stopped at a bakery for lunch, and I was the only person who, like, one, could just get a tan instead of a sunburn, and two, who was just a person of color. And that felt I think that was one of the most uncomfortable times I've had being in a space, was just so overtly singled out, and everyone was staring and kind of looking and interested, again, not in a way that felt harmful, but I definitely took notice to that. And even here, being in Chicago, there's so many spaces I walk into, like being at the grocery store, being, picking up food at a restaurant. So definitely those moments, like the question you had before, those moments where I get to be around predominantly people of color and predominantly Asians and predominantly, take a step further, Vietnamese people, there is a slight, like, I can kind of let my guard down.
Mm-hmm. Makes a lot of sense. Yeah, a lot of thoughts. You're stirring up so many thoughts in me, but I'll share two. One is Los Angeles compared to Chicago is way more diverse. Yes. People talk about Chicago, and there's diversity here compared to, say, Montana, but Los Angeles is on it's a totally different scale. Totally different scale.
I don't think I know I didn't have the appreciation for that.
I mean, it's so segregated here too, and LA has pockets of homogeneity, but it's much different. And then the other thing is casing the joint and looking around who's in the room, and I laugh because when I'm on social media and I see a photograph and it's all white people, every single time, if there's like more than 3 white people and there's no visible people of color, sometimes there's people of color who like identify as a person of color but don't necessarily look like it, I want to write as a comment in all caps, whites, every time, and just write it and just turn off any notification of any further commenting. So it stands out to me too. And I think white people can't hear it enough, that when people of color are in, that we do that. That's one of the first things that people of color do when they get in any space is look around and see who else is in the room.
Mhm. It really is. Yeah, it's almost like okay, like, and again, not my job, not our job as people of color, but definitely a lot of times I notice, and some other times it's like, okay, like what face do I need to put on?
Hmm.
Like what version of myself do I need to be walking into this place, and then again, doing the work to soon after let go of that and just
Right.
be who I am.
Yeah.
It's so loaded and so deep seated that I think, even for myself and just talking about it with Jesse or other people, it's really like the first time I've been able to, I mean, not the first time, but the first opportunity I've taken to really voice what those feelings are, those like immediate actions I take are like.
So you've spoken about this some, but what have you found healing around these kinds of things? Around the microaggressions, around that internalized, that shame. Where have you found healing or growth or hope?
I think, honestly, I think kind of that feeling that, you were talking about looking on social media or anywhere and having that, I don't know, there is just like this icky feeling seeing kind of, nothing but white people being celebrated and plastered on every single image that you see, even like home decor posts or, like roller skating or gardening, like all of the examples that I think are so prevalent. Maybe I'm part of the problem, and that like it's all an algorithm of what I'm liking and what I'm engaging in. But I think just that feeling of starting to finally recognize that, like, oh, it's kind of gross to only see like white representation on social media and billboards and ads and on TV. That like really helps me celebrate that I have something else going on, that like I do look different, that I have a deeper sense of culture and connection to, a different language and food and art and music, and that even though I didn't grow up in Vietnam, like there is something about that like my parents brought and that my parents instilled in me so deeply that I think just leaning into and acknowledging and recognizing and again celebrating has been really healing. It's almost just giving myself permission and kind of, not playing the comparison game, not feeling the need to have to fit in. That like fitting in isn't always the most fun way to be, and I think I'm definitely just doing more and more work around that. And I think just that, I think it just boils down to self acceptance in all facets of my life, in my Americanness, in my Vietnamese-ness, in my womanhood, in my like 30s now, in everything. I think just having that starting from a place of self-acceptance is healing and gives me kind of that openness to experiencing myself more authentically, and therefore like everyone I interact with in the world I live in a more authentic way.
Thank you. Yeah, it's beautiful. So before we sign off, Diane, is there anything else you'd like to share that we didn't get to that's on your heart or on your mind?
Yeah, I think, I I am a forever student. I have so much to learn. I have so many areas that I want to know more about, to get more deeply involved in. I want to be able to lift other people's voices. I want to connect. And I think so much of that is not to like beat the word over the head, but there's so much to be celebrated in us as people of color and people of culture, that, I want to thank you for having me on. I want to thank you for, one, just being who you are, an incredibly generous and open and authentic person, but also creating this platform for people like me to come on who, whatever realm of work that we've done around being a person of color or not, to get to listen to shared experiences, and I think just share in being people, in the struggle, in the wonderful parts, and all of it. I think my last thought is just a big thank you for having the conversation, and I can't wait to keep listening and following along, because I think there is something so healing in just sharing experiences.
Well, Diane Tran Weinberg, thank you for coming on. It's been wonderful to hear your story and to get to know you more in this way. Really, you opened my heart today, hearing about your family and the process of assimilation and the shame and the overcoming of it. So thank you for being here.